Welcome to episode 3 of the podcast Ghosts, Demons, and Murder. Oh my. My name is Hayden Crook, and I will be your host for today's episode on all things Native American folklore. November is Native American Heritage Month, and I decided to discuss Native American folklore to celebrate the culture. My in-laws are Native American, and to be respectful to all the Native American peoples, I changed the wording in some of these articles from Indians to Native Americans. Indian was a term created by Christopher Columbus when he accidentally landed in the Americas instead of the Indies, and most Native American peoples dislike the term. Our first, fo- our first folklore discussed will be the Wendigo, which was recently featured in the 2021 film Antlers. I highly recommend watching Antlers if you like drama thriller movies mixed with folklore and monsters. So my first source is Legends of America for information about the Wendigo. Um, Basil Johnson, an Ojibwe teacher and scholar located in Ontario, Canada, gives us a gruesome description of the Wendigo. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Its body was unclean and suffering from suppurations of the flesh, giving off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. This article continues. In Minnesota's North Woods, the forests of the Great Lake region, and the central regions of Canada are said to live a malevolent being called a Wendigo, also spelled or called Windigo. This creature may appear as a monster with some human characteristics, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and made them monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and cultural taboos against such behaviors, known by several names: Wendigo, Witigo, Witico, and Wetigo. Each roughly translates to the evil spirit that devours mankind. This creature has long been known among the Algonquian, Ojibwe, Eastern Cree, Saulteaux, West Main Swampy Cree, Nescapi, and Innu peoples. They have described them as giants, many times larger than human beings. Although descriptions can vary somewhat, common to all these cultures is the view that the Wendigo is a malevolent, cannibalistic, supernatural being, strongly associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. The, Al- the Algonquian legend describes the creature as a giant with a heart of ice. Sometimes it is thought to be entirely made of ice. Its body is skeletal and deformed with missing lips and toes. The Ojibwa describe it. It was a large creature, as tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory. And those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. According to the legends, a Wendigo is created whenever a human resorts to cannibalism to survive. In the past, this occurred more often when Native Americans and settlers found themselves stranded in the bitter snows and ice of the North Woods. Sometimes stranded for days, survivors might have felt compelled to cannibalize the dead to survive. Other versions of the legend cite that a Wendigo might also possess humans who displayed extreme greed, gluttony, and excess. Thus, the myth served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Native American versions of the creature spoke of a gigantic spirit over 15 feet tall that had once been human but had been transformed into a creature by magic. Though the descriptions of the creature vary slightly, the Wendigo is generally said to have glowing eyes, long yellowed fangs, terrible claws, and overly long tongues. Sometimes they are described as having sallow, yellowish skin, and other times they are covered with matted hair. The creature is said to have several skills and powers, including stealth. It is a near perfect hunter, knows and uses every inch of its territory, and can control the weather through dark magic. They are also portrayed as simultaneously gluttonous and emaciated from starvation. Wendigos are said to be cursed to wander the land, eternally seeking to fulfill their voracious appetite for human flesh. And if there is nothing left to eat, it starves to death. The legend lends its name to the disputed modern medical term Wendigo psychosis. Some psychiatrists consider it a syndrome that creates an intense craving for human flesh and a fear of becoming a cannibal. Ironically, the psychosis occurs in people living around the Great Lakes of Canada and the United States. Wendigo psychosis usually develops in the winter in individuals isolated by heavy snow for long periods. The initial symptoms are poor appetite, nausea, and vomiting. Subsequently, the individual develops a delusion of being transformed into a Wendigo monster. People who have Wendigo psychosis increasingly see others around them as being edible. At the same time, they have an exaggerated fear of becoming cannibals. So, a quick side note, Wendigo psychosis is a major theme of the previously mentioned film Antlers, and I feel like they covered that very well. So, once again, just my little side note, side piece. Go ahead and check that movie out, Antlers. I believe it is on Hulu. Last time I checked, it was streaming on there, but I'm not sure. I'm not, maybe HBO. Well, it's called, but HBO Max. I think it should be on there still as well. But definitely check it out. I thought it was good. I know there was a lot of criticism and such that it wasn't, jumpy and very scary. It was more of a psychological thing. But obviously, what I've just kind of talked about, the Wendigo psychosis and phenomena is a psychological thing. It's a state of mind. Um, so yeah. The article continues. The most common response when a person showed signs of Wendigo psychosis was a curing treatment by traditional native healers. In past cases, if these attempts failed and the possessed person began to threaten those around them or to act violently or antisocially, they were executed. There have been reports regarding the psychosis dating back hundreds of years. A 1661 Jesuit relations document stated, "What caused us greater concern was the intelligence that met us upon entering the lake, namely that the men deputed by our conductor to summon the nations to the North Sea, and assigning them a rendezvous where they were to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. Those poor men, according to the report given us, were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all these species of disease, which affects their imagination and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men, like veritable werewolves, and devour them voraciously, without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily, the more they eat. The ailment attacked our deputies, and his death is the sole remedy among those simple people for checking such acts of murder. They were slain in order to stay the course of their madness." Another documented case occurred in 1878 when a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named Swift Runner suffered one of the worst cases. Swift Runner was a trader with the Hudson Bay Company who was married and the father of 6 children. In 1875, he served as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. During the winter of 1878 to 1879, Swift Runner and his family were starving, along with numerous other Cree families. His eldest son was the first to die of starvation, and at some point, Swift Runner succumbed to Wendigo psychosis. Though emergency food supplies were available at Hudson's Bay Company Post, some 25 miles away, he did not attempt to travel. Instead, he killed the remaining members of his family and consumed them. He eventually confessed and was executed by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. Sorry. A Wendigo allegedly made several appearances near Roseau in northern Minnesota from the late 1800s through the 1920s. Each time it was reported, an unexpected death followed, and finally it was seen no more. Another well-known case involving Wendigo psychosis was that of Jack Fiddler, an Ojibwe chief and medicine man known for his powers at defeating Wendigos. Fiddler claimed to have defeated 14 Wendigos during his lifetime. Some of the creatures were said to have been sent by enemy shamans, and others were members of his band who had been taken with the insatiable, incurable desire to eat human flesh. In the latter case, family members usually asked Fiddler to kill a very sick loved one before they turned Wendigo. Fiddler's brother Peter Flett was killed after turning Wendigo when the food ran out on a trading expedition. Hudson Bay Company traders, the Cree and missionaries knew the Wendigo legend, though they often explained it as a mental illness or superstition. Regardless, several incidents of people turning Wendigo and eating human flesh are documented in the company's records. Hold on real quick, my throat. Had this problem the other day when I recorded an episode and it was not pretty. Okay. In 1907, the Canadian authorities arrested Fiddler and his brother Joseph for murder. Jack committed suicide, but Joseph was tried and sentenced to life in prison. He ultimately was granted a pardon but died 3 days later in jail before receiving the news of this pardon. Among the Assiniboine, the Cree, and the Ojibwe, a satirical ceremonial dance is sometimes performed during famine to reinforce the seriousness of the Wendigo taboo. The frequency of Wendigo psychosis cases decreased sharply in the 20th century as the Native Americans came into greater and greater contact with Western ideologies. However, Wendigo creature sightings are still reported, especially in northern Ontario near the Cave of the Wendigo and around Kenora, where traders have allegedly spotted it. Trackers and trappers for decades. Okay. Many still believe that the Wendigo roams the woods and the prairies of northern Minnesota and Canada. Many have given Kenora, Ontario, Canada, the title of Wendigo capital of the world. Sightings of the creature in this area have continued well into the new millennium. And then my second source is the Canadian Encyclopedia, and it talks more about the symbolism and meaning of the Wendigo itself. But in Canada, they call it the Wendigo instead of the Wendigo, like here in the States. So this article says, legends of the Wendigo reveal much about the beliefs, ways of life, social structures, and traditions of the people who tell these stories. For some, Wendigo legends serve as reminders of the importance of community, and more importantly, about what can happen when individuals are left outside of the community. One recipe for creating a Wendigo: extreme hunger, cold, and isolation were ever present and threatening facts of life for many First Nations people living in the northern boreal forests. In fact, most Wendigo stories begin with an individual or a small group trapped in the wilderness without food for an extended period, alone, and in the cold. Wendigos were said to kill lonely travelers or a member of a group and then take on their personality temporarily before eventually killing other humans it encountered. Similarly, a Wendigo's legendary greed represented attitudes about sharing in many indigenous cultures. In the wilderness, human survival often depended on communal cooperation and the sharing of food and possessions. Any individual who refused to share local resources, especially in times of great deprivation, was considered a monster. According to historian Sean Smallman, the Wendigo is still seen as a symbol of greed in modern society, as manifested in capitalism and corporate consumerism. The creature has also come to serve as a metaphor for the injustices the indigenous peoples have faced in Canada, including residential schools, the restriction of rights in the Indian Act, the 60s scoop, and similarly assimilative processes. Armand Ruffo's film, A Wendigo Tale from 2010, for example, uses the monster to tell a story about the intergenerational trauma of residential schools. For some indigenous persons, the Wendigo represents the forces of colonialism. So that was the Wendigo. Wendigo. I liked that. I liked the sources I found. Um, I feel like it was accurate and respectful. So the next folklore to be discussed will be the Navajo Skinwalkers, which I'm from Arizona. I grew up in some of the areas where they're talking about some of these articles will be talking about stuff which I think is very interesting. My third source is the New Mexico Explorer, and it says in the American Southwest, the Navajo, Hopi, Utes, and other tribes each have their own version of the skinwalker, but each boils down to the same thing: a malevolent witch capable of transforming itself into a wolf, coyote, bear, bird, or any other animal. When the transformation is complete, the human witch inherits the speed, strength, or cunning of the animal whose shape it has taken. We know from personal experience that it is extremely difficult to get Native Americans to discuss skinwalkers, even in the most general terms. Practitioners of Adishkash, or witchcraft, are considered to be a very real presence in the Navajo world. Few Navajo want to cross paths with Nagalashi, trying to say that right. I don't know. Otherwise known as a skinwalker. The cautious Navajo will not speak openly about skinwalkers, especially with strangers, because to do so might invite the attention of an evil witch. After all, a stranger who asks questions about skinwalkers just might be one himself, looking for his next victim. Skinwalkers are not boogeymen, and they aren't the figures made up to scare children. Unlike Anglo stories of werewolves and witches, they don't lose control and kill everything in their path, or maliciously curse people for no reason. Like humans, they do kill, and like humans, they have motivations for these acts of aggression. Power and revenge fuel their murderous intent, but such things cannot occupy the brain of a rational creature all the time, and skinwalkers do not make murder part of their daily routine. Other than their origin story, legends of skinwalkers rarely include death or any kind of mauling. Instead, common stories include skinwalkers in their animal form running alongside a vehicle and matching their speed even as the driver accelerates. Eventually, they get bored with this routine and simply disappear into the surrounding wilderness. In some respects, it seems rather playful, like a dog chasing a car that passes on the street. In other instances, people report seeing or hearing skinwalkers outside their homes at night. Rarely, however, does a skinwalker enter the dwelling. Skinwalkers have been reported by both native and non-native people, including a popular story here in New Mexico of skinwalkers being seen by state police on a stretch of roadway on Navajo territory. In Navajo thinking, all good things in life result from respect for the harmony of the universe, known as Hojo. An orderly balance governs the actions and thoughts of all living things. Like any other ideal state, This can be difficult to maintain, whether conscious or unconscious, or the result of a skinwalker. A transgression can result in illness, misfortune, or even disaster, and can be remedied only with a prescribed ceremony to the offended deity. Unlike Western medicine, Navajo cures are targeted at body, mind, and spirit, calling on the patient and divine people to restore his harmony with the world. A skinwalker is tied up with the Navajo concept of good and evil. The Navajos believe that life is a kind of wind blowing through you. Some people have a dark wind, and they tend to be evil. How do you tell? People who have more money than they need and aren't helping their kinfolk. That's one symptom of it. Along with this tendency toward evil, if they're initiated into a witchcraft cult, they get a lot of powers. Depending on the circumstances, they can turn into a dog, they can fly, they can disappear. A lot of Navajos will tell me empathetically, especially when they don't know me very well, that they don't believe in all that stuff. And then when you get to be a friend, they'll start telling you about the first time they ever saw one. All right. My next source 4, is from Atlas Obscura. And they wrote about a canyon they went into, and there are things called skinwalker doors, apparently, which are like portals. So I'm going to talk about that from this article, which I thought was interesting. So Antelope Canyon is a 660-foot long slot canyon, a thin passageway created by flowing water on Navajo land in Arizona. It can be accessed when led by a Navajo guide. The entrance to the upper canyon is in an outcropping of sandstone about 120 feet high, with an ominous vertical opening splitting its face. Inside that opening, a winding passage varies in width from several yards to a couple chest widths wide. The floor is covered with a tiny layer of fine sand. Above the sliver of light that is the top of the crevice and is often blocked by twists in the rock wall. It was beautiful. Enough light filtered in to set a comfortable ethereal mood, and the walls were gorgeous, almost glowing pink and orange and shaped like frozen waves, as if someone had sculpted the soft sandstone with a cake icing tool. In reality, it was water that had done all the sculpting. Even though the place was bone dry on our visit, it is extremely prone to flash floods. The idea was terrifying even without the werewolf witches. Being trapped in that claustrophobic space, underwater, knocked against all the beautiful whirls and outcrops of rock. And that wasn't just paranoia. People have drowned in Antelope Canyon. In 1997, 11 succumbed to a flash flood there. In 2010, during another flash flood, a group was able to get to safety, but was stranded until the waters abated. The Skinwalker door that Ryan had drawn my attention to was a flat section of rock, about 6 feet tall, inset into the wall and rounded at the top. It's nothing I would have noticed on my own, but once pointed out, it did seem like all it needed was a knob. Modern stories of Skinwalker encounters don't involve portals. And of course, Ryan might have just been having a bit of fun with a wide-eyed tourist, as many Navajo find the subject to be taboo and don't like to discuss skinwalkers, especially with outsiders. In 1987, skinwalkers burst into the wider public consciousness when they were used as a defense in a murder trial in Flagstaff, Arizona. The body of a 40-year-old Navajo woman named Sarah Saganitzo was found behind the hospital where she worked. A former English professor at Northern Arizona University named George Abney was accused, arrested, and taken to trial. The defense argued that a skinwalker had killed Saganitzo based on the fact that she was Navajo and found with a broken stick across her throat and a clump of graveyard grass near her truck. The defense claimed the two objects were evidence of a skinwalker ritual. Abney was at first found guilty, but then acquitted a year later. Skinwalkers have continued to capture people's imaginations ever since. In 2021, a clip was released on TikTok that purported to show a strange skeletal creature jumping from a grassy patch of wilderness. It gathered 6 million views and tons of comments, hypothesizing that the creature was a skinwalker. In fact, clips with the hashtag skinwalker have a total of more than 1 billion views on that social media platform. It's mostly thanks to one Navajo creator named John Soto, who raised the profile of the creature when in fall 2020 he posted a series of videos himself looking for skinwalkers on his Arizona property that went viral and garnered millions of views. It is an ancient evil, a horror story, a cryptid, a meme. The skinwalker, is a surprisingly versatile monster, and if you want to up your chances of finding one, I can take you to its front door. Hold on, drink break. All right. Source 5 is Legends of America again, and it talks about how what you have to do to become a skinwalker in the process. To become a skinwalker, he or she needs to be initiated by a secret society that requires the evilest of deeds, the killing of a close family member, most often a sibling. After completing this task, the individual acquires supernatural powers, which gives them the ability to shapeshift into animals. They are often seen as coyotes, wolves, foxes, cougars, dogs, and bears, but they can take the shape of any animal. They then wear the skins of the animal they transform into, hence the name Skinwalker. Sometimes they also wore animal skins or antlers atop their heads, giving them more power. They chose what animal they want to turn into, depending on the abilities needed for a particular task, such as speed, strength, endurance, stealth, claws, teeth, etc. They may transform again if trying to escape from pursuers. Because of this, the Navajo consider it taboo for its members to wear the pelt of any predatory animal. However, sheepskin, leather, and buckskin are acceptable. The skinwalkers can also take possession of the bodies of human victims if a person locks eyes with them. After taking control, the witch can make its victims do and say things they wouldn't otherwise. Once they were shapeshifted, others could tell they were not real animals because their eyes were very different from those of the animals. Instead, their eyes are very human, and when light shines on them, they turn bright red. Alternatively, their eyes look more like animals when they are in human form. Skinwalkers and other witches have long been blamed for unexpected struggles and tragedies, including sickness, drought, poor crops, and sudden deaths. Even smaller or individual problems such as windstorms during dances, alienation of affection by mates, the death of livestock, and reversal of fortune were often believed to be a witch's work. This was most apparent with the Navajo witch purge of 1878, which initially evolved from a cultural response to so many people moving across and onto their lands. After a series of wars with the U.S. Army, the Navajo were expelled from their land and forced to march to the Bosco Redondo, Fort Sumner, in New Mexico, and was known as the Long Walk of the Navajo in 1864. There, the people suffered from bad water, failed crops, illness, and death, reducing their numbers dramatically. After 4 years, the government finally admitted they had made a mistake, and the Navajo were allowed to return to their homeland in the Four Corners area. During these years, many of the tribe's members were said to have turned to shape-shifting to escape the terrible conditions. In the meantime, the rest of the tribe was convinced that their gods had deserted them. Once the people had returned to their homeland, their conditions improved, but the dreaded skinwalkers, who they blamed for their years on the bleak reservation, were still among them. Accusations of witchcraft and the hunting of the skinwalkers began when someone found a collection of witch artifacts wrapped in a copy of the Treaty of 1868. The tribal members unleashed deadly consequences. The Navajo witch purge occurred in 1878, in which 40 suspected Navajo witches were killed to restore harmony and balance to the tribe. Our final folklore, which will be discussed, will be the Tehihan, the Little Cannibals of the Plains. And I've never heard this one before. I'd heard of Skinwalkers. I've heard of the Wendigo. So I added this one because I thought it was kind of a neat story, a folklore story. Among the most dreaded figures in the lore of the Plains Native Americans were child-sized dwarfs that were incredibly strong, very aggressive, bloodthirsty, and often attacked in large numbers. Tehihan comes from the Arapaho word meaning strong. The Arapaho also call them the Hes- Hesesetahi, Hesesetahi, meaning little people. These these small, fearsome warriors were said to be so aggressive because they believed they had to be killed in battle to reach the afterlife. These small creatures dwell in the vast areas of the Great Plains between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains, and are known in the legends of the Cheyenne, Crow, Arapaho, Omaha, Osage, Kanza, Shoshone, Comanche, Ponca, and Gros Ventre. Descriptions of these mini monsters vary from tribe to tribe. Among some Siouan tribes, including the Osage, Omaha, and Kanza, they are said to sometimes have wings, and the Omaha further say that they only have one eye. The Crow see them with pot bellies and no necks. Among the Omaha and Ponca, they were called Gadaze, meaning wild people, who hunted with bows and poisoned arrows, and were said to have been able to produce wounds under the skin without breaking the flesh. Among most of the Plains Native Americans, these tiny warriors are described to be about 2 to 4 feet tall, are dark skinned, have squat necks, sharp teeth, and can run very fast, are very far outpacing their human counterparts. They are almost always hostile to human beings and are gluttonous, killing more people than they can probably eat. The wild people have magical powers and can be dangerous, sometimes kidnapping children or using witchcraft to harm people. Some legends say that they have the power to turn themselves invisible. According to most versions of the story, the race of cannibal dwarves was destroyed in an ancient war by the Arapaho and their allied tribes. So, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Ghosts, Demons, and Murder. Oh my. Next time, we will be discussing 2 true crime cases involving missing and murdered indigenous peoples. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.